A very good evening and welcome to the 2017 Ethel M Wood Lecture of the University of London. Can you hear me, or do I need to talk a little bit louder? I'll try to move it a little bit closer to my face. My voice, I'm afraid, isn't very strong today, so I can't talk terribly loudly. Welcome again to the Ethel M Wood Lecture this year. Our speaker is Thomas Römer, who I will introduce in a second. Obviously, this is a lecture that is sponsored by the University of London and not just King's, and we're very glad to have a few colleagues from Heythrop College here as well. Our speaker today, Thomas Römer, you already see his lecture title and the first slide on the screen, is a man who, as is always classically said, needs no introduction. And I will not bore you with a very long introduction anyways, and I think that our current head of department, Paul Joyce, has selected me to chair this evening because he knows I don't give long introductions. But a few words, I think, are necessary. The most important thing for me, personally, when I heard that Thomas Römer was going to come and give the lecture tonight, was a great excitement because he's one of the superstars of the study of the Hebrew Bible, known the world over, operational and read in French, in German and in English, and I see that some of his books have been translated into Japanese. I guess few of us have that distinction. He is the professor, the chair of Biblical Worlds, Milieu Biblique at the Collège de France in Paris since 2007. He is, with that, the first biblical scholar at the Collège de France since Ernest Renan in the late 19th century. Since then, no biblical scholar has held any position at the Collège de France. There have been sort of predecessors of him in the chair of Hebrew and Aramaic, which does exist and has been rededicated as the Biblical Worlds Chair currently. Among them, André Dupont-Sommet, who was in that chair from 1963 to 71, and it's relatively well known in the Semitic world. Then André Cacot, who was in the chairs from 72 till 94, and is also reasonably well known in the world of Semitic inscriptions. Since then, the chair has been vacant, or was vacant, between 1994 and 2007. Judging by the names of the predecessors, they were trying to find somebody called André, who had a reasonable control of Hebrew and Aramaic, but couldn't find anybody in Paris to do that. And so they looked around, whom could we take? And they found Thomas Römer. Alas, not André Römer. Maybe your parents should have known better. To fulfill the role of this chair in the wider world of Hebrew, Aramaic, and biblical studies. Thomas Römer has worked widely, largely in the Pentateuch, and is currently finishing a large project on Numbers, if I'm informed well. But he has also published widely on issues of homosexuality in the Bible, on wisdom literature, on Jeremiah. I have a list of his publications according to his website on the Collège de France, and it lists, I think, 295 items. I will not bore you with those. It is a long list. Have a look. Of those, 15 are books, and I think another 25 are edited books. This shows what a phenomenal impact Professor Römer has had on the field of biblical studies, and indeed an impact that he's had not just on biblical studies in academia, but in the world outside academia and in other disciplines within academia. I now invite you to welcome Thomas Römer for this year's Ethel M Wood Lecture on the topic of the origin, function, and disappearance of the Ark of the Covenant according to the Hebrew Bible.
Good evening, can you hear me? Yes? Okay. The acoustic is a little bit strange, but I hope it's okay for you. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Paul Joyce and Professor Jonathan Stelkel for inviting me for this lecture. I'm very honored, and this is my first time I'm lecturing in King's College. I've been to King's College when there was the SBL International meeting, but this was in another building, not such a nice anatomy building. And Jonathan told me if my lecture is bad, I will finish here on this table. So I hope this wouldn't be the case. Maybe I should just tell you a word why I chose the topic of the Ark of the Covenant. This is related to a project that the Collège de France has with the University of Tel Aviv. It's Professor Finkelstein. We will start dig a place, it's called Kiryat Yearim. I will tell you about it in a moment. And this is one of the places where the Ark was supposed to stand at least for 20 years. So I thought I have to get a little bit familiar with all these stories. And so I'm a little bit now into the Ark narratives, and not only the Ark narratives, but more general about the Ark in the Hebrew Bible. Okay, so let's start with some preliminary thoughts. The Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of Yahweh, has stimulated the imagination of many people from biblical times until today. It has served as inspiration for much stories, a subject of paintings, and even the fodder for Hollywood directors who still show an interest in producing all kinds of movies about the lost Ark. There are probably many reasons for this fascination. For starters, the Hebrew Bible itself leaves many questions about the Ark open. What happened to the Ark after King Solomon brought it to the temple? Was the Ark deported or destroyed, or when the Babylonians conquered Jerusalem? And what did the Ark originally contain? So let's start with an overview where the Ark is mentioned. In the Torah, the Ark is mentioned for the first time in the book of Exodus. There's a mention of Aaron, of a box, but this is just to put the bones of Joseph in, that's something else. So the first time the Ark is mentioned is in the book of Exodus in relation to the construction of the mobile sanctuary. We find it then in Leviticus 16 and 6 times in the book of Numbers, 3 times mentioned again as part of the sanctuary, and 3 times as a guide for the people during the wilderness wandering and in wartime. In the book of Deuteronomy, the Ark is mentioned in chapter 10 and 31, and the text in Deuteronomy emphasizes the idea that the Ark contained the 2 tablets of the law. The Ark appears in all books of the former prophets. In the conquest accounts of the book of Joshua, it plays a prominent role in the story of the crossing of the Jordan, where it is carried by priests. It is further mentioned in the narrative about the walls of Jericho in chapter 6, and once again chapter 7, for the last time then in a ceremony of blessing in 833, but not in any other conquest account. In the book of Judges, it's mentioned just 1 time in a little strange note where the Ark now appears to be in Bethel. In the book of Samuel, however, the Ark is found in the sanctuary of Shiloh. 1 Samuel 3-7 contains a long story, I will come back to this, commonly referred to as the Ark narrative. This story recounts how the Philistines captured the Ark and placed it in the sanctuary of their god Dagon. However, the power of the Ark was so strong that the Philistines restored it. Once back in Israel, the Ark did not come back to Shiloh, but remained in Kiryat Yearim for 20 years. Then it is mentioned once in 1 Samuel 14, where the Ark seems to be located in Gibeah, in the region of Benjamin, and then 2 Samuel 6, which is often considered to be the conclusion of the Ark narrative. And this is David's transfer of the Ark to Jerusalem. In 1 Kings, the Ark is mentioned in the story of Solomon's rise and the construction of the temple. Once the temple is completed, Solomon introduces the ark into the temple's Holy of Holies. Then, astonishingly, the ark disappears from the Book of Kings, and no further information is provided about what becomes of it during the fall of Jerusalem. In the latter prophet, it only appears in the book of Jeremiah, in one oracle that demands the audience to cease to commemorate the lost ark or even to construct a new one. We will come back to all these texts in a while. In the writings, the author of Chronicles seem particularly interested in the Ark of the Covenant of Yahweh. They even add new passages about the Ark that are not mentioned in the book of Samuel. Outside Chronicles, only Psalm 132 mentions the Ark in the context of a saying alluding to its entry into Jerusalem. To sum up this overview, if you cannot read it, it doesn't matter, it's just to show you all the texts where the ark appears. What is important, if we summarize, we have three major textual blocks in which the ark is mentioned. First, as an item of the mobile sanctuary and of the Jerusalem temple. Second, as a symbol of Yahweh's presence in the conquest accounts in the book of Joshua. And finally, as the major character of the so-called ark narrative. So we go through these three topics. There is a scholarly consensus. You know, in Hebrew Bible there are very few consensuses, but here's one at least. There's a scholarly consensus that the text relating to the construction of the ark in Exodus 25 and following belong to priestly layer of the Pentateuch. And these texts may even belong to a later date than the so-called P-Grundschrift, the original P. In these texts, the ark is mostly called Aron ha-Edut, the ark of the testimony, which is interesting because it seems that the P text here avoid the term Berit, covenant, which they use in other occasions for the covenant with Noah or the covenant with Abraham. So the use of Edut should be explained. Some people would say it presupposes the Deuteronomistic idea that the ark was the container of a tablet, for the tablets of stone. But there is perhaps another explanation, and this would be that the priestly ideas about the ark are influenced by the Mesopotamian practice of deposit tablets. These tablets contained royal inscriptions describing the construction of the temple or the palace and were subsequently placed in boxes as building deposits. According to Horowitz, such royal building inscriptions inspired the priestly account of the building of the tabernacle. If this is indeed the case, then the priestly writers of Exodus 25 and following would have understood the ark as a building deposit for the mobile sanctuary in the wilderness, containing not the law, but the divine instructions that Yahweh gave to Moses in Exodus 25 to 31. In this way, P, the priestly writers, would thus transform the traditional idea of the building deposit. Since the sanctuary is portable, the building deposit must also be transported. The texts in Deuteronomy 10 and 31 understand the making of the ark quite differently. The ark is called Ha-Aron or Aron Berit Adonai and is presented as a container of the tablets of the law. The same as in 1 Kings 8. The books of Chronicles preserve the latest text among the biblical discourses about the ark. Here the ark is called in a very different way, you have it on the screen, and the chronicler very often adds the term Berit, covenant, which P avoids, to the ark, which stands in contrast to many texts also of the book of Samuel. Ralph Klein puts it in this way, where the passages have a parallel in the Vorlage, in each case the chronicler added the word covenant. For the chronicler, the ark is a symbol of the covenant relationship between Yahweh and Israel, and also the symbol of the covenant, and also the symbol of Yahweh's presence in Jerusalem. The chronicler probably wished to suggest a point of continuity between the ark of the covenant and the divine covenant with the patriarchs. Contrary to the priestly text in Exodus, chronicler also emphasizes the decisive role that the Levites must play in regard to the ark and its transportation. They are the ones that carry the ark and who appear as custodians of the covenant between Yahweh and Israel. At the earliest, all of the above-mentioned texts were written in the Babylonian period. Most of them date later to the Persian or even Hellenistic period, and they all point to a transformation of the original role of the ark. Traces of such a transformation also appear in this text in 1 Kings 8:9. According to this text, there was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets of stone that Moses had placed there in Horeb, where Yahweh made a covenant with the Israelites when they came out of the land of Egypt. This emphasis on nothing else, en ba'aron rak, nothing else, is a little bit suspicious and makes it likely that the Deuteronomistic and the priestly writers discourse about the ark are the results of a relecture of its original function. This original function can perhaps be detected in narratives where the ark appears in a military context. In the books of Joshua and Samuel, but also in Numbers 10 and 14, the ark symbolizes the divine presence in battle and war. Also, the book of Numbers is a very late collection of disparate materials. It is possible that it includes quite old material as well. And I put on the screen some verses from chapter 10 in Numbers, which describes the departure from the Mount Sinai and the beginning of the travel through the wilderness. If you look to this text, you can see very easily that verse 34 is an insert because it speaks about something else, about the cloud of Yahweh who interrupts the whole description of the ark. And even the remaining verses, if you look carefully, you can follow some German authors and think that even 33b and 35 and 36 may be later than this little note in 33a, because there is this repetition of these 3 days of journey. So the mention of the ark may be then a late insert and does not really fit into the context, because there is no war at the moment when they leave from the Sinai. So it's possible that these mention of the ark you have here were probably added in order to prepare then the mention of the ark in the next book in Deuteronomy. But this does not necessarily mean that the content of these verses are a late post-priestly invention, as some of my colleagues have claimed. Interestingly, what you can see here is that the Masoretes have highlighted these verses 35 and 36 by 2 inverted nun. I pointed them on yellow. It is a way to underline the antiquity, or at least the specificity of these saying about the ark. The saying about the ark in Numbers 10:35, rise up, Yahweh, let your enemies be scattered, and those who hate you flee before your face, has a parallel in Psalm 68. Most scholars would argue that Psalm 68 takes up Numbers 10, However, the other idea also exists, that Psalm 68 is earlier and taken up by numbers 10. So I think it's difficult to decide, but it's also possible that one should consider at least the plausibility that both texts refer to a traditional saying or song about Yahweh's rising to defend his people against his enemies. In Numbers 10, the ark clearly functions as a portable shrine of Yahweh in which he resides and from which he departs when he's fighting for Israel. If the original function of the ark was kind of a palladium that materialized Yahweh's presence in war, it seems logical at first sight that the ark is also mentioned in the book of Joshua. Here, however, the ark's original function has somewhat changed. In the story of the crossing of the Jordan in Joshua 3 and 4, most passages about the ark connect it to the priests who have to carry it. And it seems much more a liturgical object, similar to its role in the book of Chronicles. Most commentators would also agree that these verses about the priest carrying the ark do not belong to the original story of the crossing of the Jordan. I have here a proposal by Bieberstein, which is very minimalistic, and one may be skeptical about this reconstruction, but I think at least he is right to claim with others that the ark and the priests do not belong to the original story. You can check this. I don't know if you like these short stories, but it makes sense also without the priests and the ark. The fact that in some passages the ark is called Ark of the Covenant of the Lord and is transported by the priests seems to indicate a late date for these insertions, since they combine the Deuteronomistic concept of the Ark of the Covenant and the priestly emphasis on the role of the priests, the Kohanim. One could tentatively attribute these passages to a hexateuchal redaction, since it uses the theme of the Ark in order to emphasize the idea that the book of Joshua should still be part of the Torah, the last book of the Torah, that would be the Hexateuch. If one compares the role of the priest in Joshua 3-4 with the role of the Levites in Chronicles, one may detect behind the two books an ideological struggle between priests, the Aaronites, and the Levites. This rivalry was apparently also related to the question who was responsible for carrying the ark. In Joshua, these are the priests, and in Chronicles, these are the Levites. In Joshua 6, the situation, this is the story of the walls of Jericho. You all know the story. Otherwise, go back to the Bible and read it, but you know it. I will point it on the screen also. Again, most mentions of the ark are associated again with priests. If one follows this reconstruction, again, most verses do not appear in the original text. I don't want to make you sleep and read the whole thing. You just have a glance on it, read it. And there is one problem here, or not one problem, or something that needs to be explained. This is verse 11. Verse 11, it mentioned the ark, and in this verse, the ark is absolutely necessary for the story. And it's not the ark carried by the priests. However, one may follow against this Bieberstein, who wrote about 600 pages on Joshua 2-6, so he knows everything about it. But he has a very clever idea, because he pointed out that here it said that the ark marches around, the root Savav, Samek Bet Bet. And in all the other texts, And all the other verses, where you have it, I put it here in blue, you see that the subject is not the ark, but is the people. So here was suggested that maybe, originally here, the ark was not the ark, but was Adonai, the people of Yahweh. And then somebody wanted to put in the ark, and instead of he put Aaron. This insertion, if this is okay, or if you accept this reconstruction, you can have another opinion, but if we go with this, then the insertion of the ark of Yahweh in verses 7 and 11 would then be an earlier attempt to introduce the ark in the narrative of the conquests, owing to the ark's military functions. And later redactors, the same one who introduced the ark in chapters 3 and 4, would then have supplemented this account again. The early editions in 711 aimed to attribute the destruction of Jericho not to the people's action returning around the city, but to the presence of Yahweh in his ark. So, to sum up so far, the ark does not originally belong to the tradition of the wilderness and of the conquests. Its original Sitz im Leben is very probably the tradition conserved in the book of Samuel, and maybe also the saying what we have seen in Numbers 10. Only later was the ark integrated in the Pentateuch, in the book of Joshua, starting perhaps with the reworking of the conquest of Jericho, which still reflects a little bit its original function. There's no time to summarize a very long and complicated discussion about the origin, date, and composition of the so-called ark narratives. What we have still to resolve is to think that in Judges 20, the ark is in Bethel, and then in Samuel in Shiloh. Judges 20 is a strange story, not really politically correct. It's part of the whole story, 19 to 21. Strange things happen there, about a conflict between the Israelites tribe and the tribe of Benjamin. And there's battles, and at one moment the Israelites are in Bethel. And then you see when they are in Bethel, then it is said that the Ark of the Covenant of God was there, and also the priest. This again, you can see it very easily, you can check it. If you leave the red out, you can read the story very easily from 27a to 28b. That means the insertion of the ark and the priests was probably triggered by the mentions of the sacrifices in verse 26. The idea of the redactor was probably to imagine that prior to the construction of the Temple of Jerusalem, sacrifices and legitimate sanctuary were only there where we had the ark and the priests. He therefore needed the ark to be in Bethel, despite the contradiction that this idea introduced with the story about the ark. In 1 Samuel, we learn immediately that the ark was in Shiloh. The so-called ark narratives in 1 Samuel 4 to 7 starts with the defeat of the Israelites against the Philistines. You have here the mentions of the ark. The mention of the ark indicates clearly its function, a portable shrine of Yahweh, from which he can leave in order to defend the people. They are defeated because they didn't take the ark with them. But intriguingly, there is no text in the whole Bible that tells us how the ark would have come to Shiloh. No text. At least you find out what I didn't find. This indicates probably that we have here an independent ark tradition connected to the sanctuary of Shiloh. Israel Finkelstein, who has excavated Shiloh, came to the conclusion that the site was abandoned or destroyed in the middle of the 11th century already, BCE, and then sparsely repopulated during the 8th and 7th century. Interestingly, in the context of the Deuteronomistic redactions of the book of Samuel and Kings, you know about these redactors, the Temple of Shiloh is not criticized. You know, for the Deuteronomists, there's only one sanctuary, that's the Temple of Jerusalem. But here, Shiloh is never criticized, and this maybe could be related to the presence of the ark in this shrine. The priestly dynasty of the Elite is condemned, but not the sanctuary itself. Regarding to the ideology of cult centralization, which is an important theme in the so-called Deuteronomistic history, the idea that only Jerusalem is the legitimate sanctuary, the Deuteronomists seem to have settled on a compromise of a sort. They apparently admit that in pre-monarchic times, before the construction of the Jerusalemite temple, there was another chosen place, Shiloh. From an exilic or post-exilic perspective, this idea was even not too difficult to accept, since Shiloh had already been destroyed a century before the destruction of Jerusalem. And this theory that Yahweh did choose Shiloh before Jerusalem is clearly set out in Jeremiah 7. Here you have the text of Jeremiah 7 in a clear Deuteronomistic languages, and the idea is that the Lord will destroy Jerusalem in the same way he destroyed Shiloh. And as he chose Shiloh, he had chosen Jerusalem. So the idea is that there are two chosen places, Shiloh and Jerusalem. And the idea of a prior divine choice, which when could be revoked, can be compared in the Deuteronomistic history to the election of Saul, who was then later replaced by David. Continuing this line of thought, one may wonder whether the ark narratives in 1 Samuel also suggests a transfer from Shiloh to Kiryat Yearim. The ark narrative tells us first how the ark was captured and placed in the sanctuary of the deity Dagon in Ashdod, the Philistine city. This practice can be compared to the dictation of divine statues, a practice that is attested very largely in cuneiform sources. The captures of the deities of enemies was meant to demonstrate the superiority of the victors' deities. For instance, in the annals of Sennacherib, you can find Sitka, king of Ashkelon, who had not submitted to Marduk, the gods of his father house himself, and so on, I tore away and brought to Assyria. An inscription of Sargon II, the Nimrod prison, which was redacted 706 and refers to the destruction of Samaria, mentions the god in which they had put their trust among the booty. This inscription should be juxtaposed with Neo-Assyrian bas-reliefs on which one can see soldiers of Sargon and of Sennacherib, respectively, transporting statues of gods among their warlords. Sargon's statement stresses the weakness of the enemy's god. And this disparagement of the gods of the enemies can even lead to the denial of their divinity via the destruction of the divine statues. Assurbanipal records that he puts into pieces the Elamite deities. I smashed their god and therefore thereby smoothened the heart of the Lord of the Lords. If you have this in mind, the author of the narrative apparently knows about those practices and takes them up, sometimes maybe even in order to construct what people would now call a counter-history. In 1 Samuel 5, when the ark is placed in the sanctuary of Dagon, the statue of Dagon that will it is the statue of Dagon that will be smashed through Yahweh's power. In the first night, Dagon falls down before Yahweh as if he needed to worship him. He falls down before the ark. Rather than Yahweh paying homage before the Philistine deity, it is Dagon who prostrates himself before Yahweh. And in the second night, however, the statue of Dagon is amputated in a way that is reminiscent of the mythical theme of the divine battle, but also, and I think even stronger, of the destruction of divine statues by the Assyrians. You can read the text. What is remaining is a trunk of Dagon. And if you look on this picture here, you see how the Assyrians are smashing a divine statue, and their hands are already gone, and now the head will also be cut off. So it's a trunk like what happened to Dagon in 1 Samuel 5. After the manifestation of Yahweh's power, the Philistines decide to return the ark to the Israelites. This return of the ark recalls the practice of bringing back of divine statues. Assyrian and Babylonian kings also praise themselves for having brought back the deported God to their original sanctuaries. The Esarhaddon prison tells about the return of stolen divine statues. You have here Esarhaddon's prize. Since the best parallels to 1 Samuel 4-6 are to be found in Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian practices of deportation and restoration of the gods of the vanquished people, one may assume that the ark narrative was perhaps composed during the 7th century BCE. In the light of this parallel, it also becomes clear that the function of the ark matches the function of a divine statue. It is therefore plausible that the ark contained a representation of Yahweh. But what kind of representation? You have to wait a little bit. Here time does not permit me to reconstruct the original ark narrative. Suffice it to say, I'm not convinced by a recent proposal by Porzig, who devoted a whole book on the ark narrative. And his idea was that the oldest story only told how the ark was lost to the Philistines, what he's calling a Katastrophengeschichte, history of a catastrophe. But I cannot imagine why one should just tell this. His idea is we had just this, and then later it was augmented. Anyhow, it's not important. In my view, such an independent defeat narrative does not make much sense. It seems more logical to imagine that the original story told about the loss and the return of the ark and its travels to different places before reaching a new home in Kiryat Yearim. Indeed, at the end of the story about the lost ark that finally returned, Shiloh vanishes from the scene. And there's no explanation why the ark was not brought back to its original place. Why not bring it back to Shiloh? Therefore, it's plausible that the original ark narratives ended with the installation of the ark in Kiryat Yearim, name meaning city of forests, but in some places the city is called Kiryat Baal. We have here a picture today. It's a wonderful monastery of Notre-Dame de l'Arche de l'Alliance, which is on the top, which was built on an older Byzantine church. So if the name Kiryat Baal is original, it is possible that this location contained a sanctuary of Baal. But the question is about the identity of this Baal. Baal could be any storm god, and it is not impossible also that Baal could be here a title of Yahweh. Anyhow, the fact that according to the biblical record, the ark remained about 20 years in this place may indicate that this place in Kiryat Yearim contained a sanctuary hosting the palladium of the warrior god Yahweh. This hypothesis, here you have all the travels of the Ark, this hypothesis is also supported by a text in 1 Samuel 7, according to which Abinadab's son, who hosted the Ark, needed to be consecrated as a priest, because it's a sanctuary. In this case, one of the aims of the Ark narrative would be to explain how the shrine of Heythrop replaced the sanctuary of Shiloh. And it's possible that the original Ark story ended in 1 Samuel 7, because there are a lot of differences between the Ark narratives in 1 Samuel 4 to 7 and the story of its transfer to 2 Samuel 6. In this story, it is said that the Ark is taken Mib'ale Yehuda. And this is difficult to translate. NRSV takes this as a place name from Ba'ale Yehuda. The Vulgata already and many other translation takes it from the lords of Judah, which is possible also, and a fragment from the Samuel book in Qumran, with him to Ba'ala, which is Kiryat Yearim. In this version, Kiryat Yearim is identified to Ba'ala. Some scholars even think this may be a polemical attempt to express the idea that the only legitimate sanctuary of the Ark is the future Temple of Jerusalem, because Kiryat Yearim is Ba'ala. But this is a little bit difficult. Anyhow, the link with Jerusalem is also made in this verse through the expression of the Ark of Yahweh Tzevaot enthroned on the cherubim, an allusion to the Holy of Holies in which the Ark will be covered by the cherubim. So, what was in the Ark? Any ideas? The question of the content of the Ark has always intrigued and has also triggered very strange answers. The physicist Nikola Tesla, in a book from 1915 about the fairy tale of electricity, saw Moses as being a skillful electrician and interpreted the Ark as a machine in which electricity was generated by friction of air against silk curtains. Now, this is the beginning of the 20th century, but this still goes on until 1999. I found in the Daily Mail an article by Mr. R. Andrews. If the Israelites had set out to construct a primitive accumulator, they could have hardly picked up a better design than the Ark. I will skip here other explanations, such as the Ark built by extraterrestrials. That it would explain why Moses has to put a whale, because it's so much radiating. Anyhow, so let's return to some more serious considerations. In 1 Samuel 6, the Ark was placed on a chariot drawn by cows, a sign that it must have been an object of some importance. Of course, one can compare the Ark to sacred chests attested in Egyptian iconography and used during processions, as you have it here. A chest mounted upon a chariot seems also be attested among the Phoenicians. In a late source, Philo of Byblos, in his Phoenician history, two gods named field, Agros, maybe something like Shaddai, and rustic, Agrotes, were associated with a chest pulled by two beasts. In an iconography from Palmyra, we also see a procession with a camel carrying a portable sanctuary, and which is welcomed or worshipped by a group of men and followed by veiled women. So it is possible that the description of the Ark of Yahweh in the Ark narrative is conceived in a similar way. But what was in the Ark? I have already pointed out that the tablets of the law in the Ark are probably a substitute for something else. Perhaps they took the place of sacred stones of the kind found in the chests of pre-Islamic Bedouins. Among certain Arab tribes, these represented two goddesses, Al-Lat and Al-Uzza, and interestingly, these goddesses were then later replaced by copies of the Quran. So the ark may have contained a sacred stone or small statue representing Yahweh. When the ark was introduced into the Temple of Jerusalem, it was probably transformed into the throne of Yahweh, whose son became Yahweh Tsevaot, enthroned on the cherubim. And later in Deuteronomistic theology, the stone representation of Yahweh was reinterpreted as containing stone tablets of the law. The silence about the ark after its introduction in the temple may be explained by the fact that in the Babylonian or early Persian period, it was not longer considered as an adequate object to represent the presence of Yahweh. This break with the tradition regarding the ark is emphasized in Jeremiah 3, a text which speaks about the lost ark. One shall say no more, the ark of the covenant of the Lord. It shall not longer come to mind. One shall no longer remember it. One will pay no attention to it. It shall not be made again. In that time one shall call Jerusalem the throne of the Lord, and all people shall rush together towards it. This oracle substitutes the city of Jerusalem for the ark in its function as the throne of Yahweh. Hence, Jerusalem as a whole is to become the seat of the God of Israel, the center of the world. But that's not the end of the story. In 2 Maccabees, we have a different story, which you have here. A different story about the ark, according to which the prophet Jeremiah hid the ark together with other holy objects. Why Jeremiah? Probably because Jeremiah is the only prophet in the Hebrew Bible who's mentioning the ark. So here in this story, you see that the ark, the tent, and the altar of incense are hidden in a place that nobody knows. But contrary to Jeremiah 3, the ark is not lost, it's not destroyed, and will appear again at the end of the present time when Yahweh will gather all the people. So we still have some hope that the ark will appear. Let me just have a word about Qumran. As we have seen in the case of Chronicle, and it's also interesting, in late time there was still this interest for the ark at the end of the Persian period or Hellenistic times. And this is also the case in some texts of Qumran, which I cannot discuss here in detail. I did this on another place. The ark appears, of course, in the manuscript who are close to the biblical writings, but also in other texts, in sectarian texts, as for instance here in the so-called Apocryphon of Moses, where the priest, this Apocryphon has 2 columns. The first is how to distinguish a good or the right from a wrong prophet, and then there's a kind of a ritual. The priest, in order to decide whether a prophet is a true or false prophet, shall approach the ark of the testimony and seek all the laws of Yahweh concerning all what have been hidden from you. The ark is related to nistarot, to hidden things. One can speculate a lot about the hidden things, but the author of this passage apparently alludes to the capacity of the high priest to approach the ark and then to interpret the law in the way other people cannot do it. And let me conclude with the Damascus document. This is also very interesting. In this Damascus document in column 5, there is an interesting passage about David. Columns 4 and 5 speak first about the 3 nets of the sons of Belial, lack of chastity or They call it prostitution, arrogance, and defilement of the sanctuary. First, in 420 to 5a, we have the cases of prostitution, and the author gives examples of monogamy. About the two entered in the ark, not the Ark of the Covenant, but the Ark of Noah. And then after speaks of defilement of the sanctuary by sexual taboos, by taking up sexual taboos from Leviticus 18. So again, what you have in red interrupts this sequence, and this is apparently also an insertion that was triggered by the quotation of Deuteronomy 17 in 2a, let him not multiply wives from himself. And here the author had a problem, or the redactor, because David did not compile to this. He had quite a lot of wives. I didn't count them now, but maybe you know. But there are more than one, for sure. And the question is, how could the great David have so many wives? And here comes the explanation. The explanation is that David did not respect the divine law, according to which the king should not have many wives, because, we can read here, of a lack of access to the divine law, which was sealed in the ark from the time after the death of Joshua and Eleazar until the arrival of the priest Zadok. So this passage explains this fault of David by referring to his lack of access to the divine law. He couldn't read the divine law. It was sealed. And this idea that the divine law was sealed in the ark probably comes from the Septuagint version of Joshua 24, which you have here, which is very close, which does not exist in the Masoretic text, and which is very close to what we have in this Damascus document. So apparently the Hebrew Vorlage of this ending of Joshua 24 was probably known to the redactor who inserted the passage about David in the Damascus document. He interpreted the events and the references to the ark in Joshua 24 in the sense that the law must have remained sealed in the ark, since worship of other gods was rife during the time of Judges. The time of the law being hidden in the scrolls comes to an end with Zadok, the priest of David, who according to 1 Chronicles 15, not to the book of Samuel, but to 1 Chronicles 15, is the one of the agents who transports the ark to Jerusalem. David is therefore excused for his polygamy, and the ark receives a new function. It is now the container for the whole Pentateuch, for the whole law, and can remain sealed in times of apostasy. The story of the ark, of course, does not end in Qumran. But what I hope to have shown in this short presentation is the origin of the biblical discourses of the ark, as well as his mysterious disappearances, in order then leave the way open for new discourses and new functions that can be attributed to a box which represents in one way or another the presence of the God of Israel. Thank you very much.